Hi, this is the second video in a series that I'm doing on some of the fundamental skills, mindsets, and behaviors that I see as critical for leaders, small business owners, or maybe emerging leaders in 2022. In the last video, I touched on one aspect of giving feedback effectively. Today, I just want to talk about the flip side of that, and that's actually receiving feedback. The research shows that we spend quite a lot of time investing in giving great feedback skills, but not necessarily in training ourselves or others to be more effective at actively seeking and receiving feedback in a really constructive way. So today I want to just cover off a couple of tips for that. For many of us as leaders, I think we intellectually get that feedback helps us grow and develop personally and within the work context. But it's in those moments that we're receiving feedback, and particularly what we might perceive as criticism, that we can tend to have some emotional resistance to the feedback we're getting. So I just want to give you some tips on how to be able to manage that more effectively. So number one, it's that old adage of deep, active listening skills. It's easy to sit in a feedback session when we're receiving the feedback and listen and nod, thank the person and move on. But you will be much more effective if you can approach that feedback with a level of genuine curiosity. So deep, active listening skills where you're curious about the information that that person is providing to you, about their perceptions of your behaviors or actions within a specific situation. Also recognizing or assuming positive intent from that person that's giving you that feedback. So the first one, deep, active listening. The second is asking questions of your feedback giver. Again, it would be easy just to take that feedback on or write it down without really trying to understand how that person has perceived and interpreted what they have seen from you. So being able to dig in to the information that they're providing you is actually critical to being more effective in implementing any new strategies. As human beings, we tend to delete a lot of information, and that is the same for people who are giving you feedback. So what I would suggest, for example, if someone had given me feedback about potentially being more assertive in meetings, I would lean in and ask, tell me a little bit more about that, Brian. I hear that you're saying that you think I should be more assertive. I'm really interested in understanding what assertive might look like from your perspective. So if you could maybe give me some examples of what you'd see me doing more of, or perhaps what you'd hear me saying more of, so I can understand exactly what you're meaning. So just digging in deeper and trying to understand a little bit more detail around the content of the message in the feedback is another really important tool. The third is, it's such a simple one, but take notes. It's very easy for us to forget what is being said in a conversation, and oftentimes people who give you feedback can potentially overload you with information. So being able to take notes around their perceptions, what they saw or heard, and some of their notes around what they'd advise you to do differently is important. The other thing to note, and this also helps in thinking about when you actually give feedback, is we can get very flooded with emotions when we're receiving feedback, especially if we feel as though that feedback might be unfair or there's a level of criticism within it. So by being flooded, I mean that our internal voice and the way we feel, so our emotions and our thoughts, overrun our internal conversation. So often the feedback can get lost within that noise internally. So be really aware of that. Taking notes will help. It also helps in thinking, God, when I give feedback, do I sometimes give too much information? Could this person be flooded with the feedback that they've given? So take notes, nice and simple. The third is just to be aware of the other person's state and point of view. You know how uncomfortable it is receiving the feedback. Do not underestimate how much courage it might have taken to give you that feedback, or how uncomfortable it might feel for the other person giving you that feedback. And just being aware of not just the intent, but the feelings of the other person can help to open up your curiosity and awareness about the feedback you're being given. Now, the final one is a really important one, and it's a point that I would say that you have to, and I definitely have to, practice over and over again, depending on the context of feedback or the person that's giving you that feedback or the type of feedback you're getting. And that is, be aware and conscious of the emotional state, the thoughts and the feelings you're having as you're receiving that feedback, because it will have an impact on how you receive the feedback, but also how much information you can take in at that point in time. So a very simple approach to being aware of your emotional state is becoming the watcher. So taking yourself slightly outside of the situation or your body and watching yourself and your responses. So the way that I might do that is that as I'm in a situation getting feedback and I'm feeling myself maybe heat up or feel that there's a rebuttal inside me, which is going to block me being open and curious, I will watch myself just outside myself, and I might think, oh, that's interesting, Amy, that you're responding like that. That's interesting that your breathing rate has increased. What could be going on here? And just take a breath, be aware of potentially even your facial features, the way you're holding your body, and make sure that you are being as open and curious as possible during that feedback session. So those are just 5 quick tips from me to help you with receiving feedback, but I've written a little bit more on my blog about receiving feedback in a constructive way. So just to round it out, those 5 tips were: deep, active listening, being present and being engaged in listening to the feedback. The second was to ask questions, understand a little bit more about the feedback that's being given. The third was to take notes, simple, but often overlooked. The fourth was to consider the other person's point of view and how challenging it might be for them to give you that feedback. And the fifth was to be aware of your mindset and emotional state and the responses you might be having in that moment. So I hope you found that valuable. If you want to read more about this really critical skill, you can find more on my blogs about giving and receiving feedback. If you want to give me some ideas about things you want to hear more about, please drop me some comments in the comments section in my feed. And I look forward to seeing you next time.